Just want to do a quick welcome to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Angela Andrieux, Product Evangelist for Mylio Photos. And today I'm joined by Lyle Licardi. He is a very well-known travel photographer. He's also the co-founder and CEO of Radiant Imaging Labs, the makers of Radiant Photo. So if you've managed to get a copy of Radiant Photo with one of our bundles or through a discount that Mylio is offering this holiday season, it's a great opportunity to learn what this software can do for you. So with that, I want to turn the floor over to Elia and go ahead, and the floor is yours.
Oh, great. You go ahead and the sharing going. Yeah, so I'm not sure how many of you have used it yet, but Radiant Photo gives you the ability to basically harness an AI core underneath of adjustment tools. And just a little bit of background before I throw some images in here. I do a lot of, well, a fair amount of client work, different countries and states, where I'll just do a huge volume of work in different areas for them, landscape work, cities, all sorts of stuff. And in my contracts, I usually say, okay, here's however many hero shots, 50 shots plus 200 in an archive, which means that I'm probably delivering 1,000 for them to review. And I spend more time pre-processing photos to send to them to review than I do processing the ones they actually select. And it drove me crazy. So, 15 years of moving shadows and highlights, midtones, all that stuff over and over again. Or what we all do is hit the auto button and then make it a little better or start over depending on what it does. So that was the basis for rethinking the way things work, but also understanding that, in 5 or 6 years, our camera sensors are going to be able to do, in large part, the same kind of practice. So when you get images, and I'll just load this one into Radiant Photo, when you open it, it'll look something like this under the quick edit panel. And when you bring a photo in, this is straight out of camera. If we were in Lightroom, shadows, highlights, or the auto button, Radiant Photo will automatically detect it. And it uses scene detection first. So you'll kind of see it fall into one of these categories. In this case, it didn't even pick up that it was a landscape. So the difference between the settings is independent from what it selects. So any of these can be used as a preset, but it's smart to know if you're going to send a bunch of stuff to it. If you're like me and you have a bunch of landscapes and then cat photos will be normally marked as animals, people, portraits, night, winter landscapes, and then landscapes. So before you've done anything with any of the images that you bring in, and I'm just dragging and dropping some 16-bit TIFF files here, just pick some fun stuff. Got some night stuff. I always do this a little bit differently each time. Everybody always asks, so you plan for the workshop? I'm like, plan? What do you mean plan? So what Radiant Photo does is it doesn't overdo things. So it's really important to understand that. The idea of me telling you, hey, I made software that can process all of your photos for you. And this is the before, this is the after. It sounds too good to be true. You're like, well, auto buttons don't work. But the idea of getting something print ready or optimizing your pixels before you need to do any additional editing in a non-destructive format sounds good. Can we make things a little better? Can we make things print ready? So the idea of Radiant Photo is no matter what you put into it, it should make things look a little better, at least a little better, and sometimes a lot better. And when you first load Radiant Photo, you'll notice that you'll be in a quick edit panel. And quick edit is not in any way inferior to detailed edit. What we've done is we've moved the most impactful tools that make the biggest changes and also make it a little bit harder to break the image, right? So strength and color, this is the smart editing. This is where the AI stacks itself. So strength in an image like this, which is going to be a little easier to see. Always forget my new hotkeys. Strength is going to be the overall exposure and contrast of the image. So the farther you push this up, the more it's going to balance that exposure from here to here. And it's also, as other AI tools, but this one being a little newer and more refined, it's adaptive. If you've done a lot of pre-processing, it's not going to make this huge shift in the photo. It's going to be very subtle because it's meant to optimize black, white, and the midtones in between. What makes this unique is independent of strength, you also have the ability to balance the color. Now, the way that this color works is pixel by pixel. So it's not just a white balance, it's a pixel by pixel analysis. And each photo is a little bit different. For this one, for example, this being a night scene, you can see that if I pull the strength up, and then we can look at the color that was coming out of the camera, which is very typical for a night shot. Well, this will go in and analyze it pixel by pixel. And instead of just making everything cool, even if I do this to the extreme, it's leaving the warm tones in the foreground while cooling down the sky. So it's actually doing a pixel by pixel analysis and correction with no artifacting or anti-aliasing. So that's underneath anything that you do. And as these come in, it's going to kind of balance it. So this is going to be the default for night. And then once you have this is where it starts to get fun. So you could, in a pre-processing mindset, send all of your images to Radiant Photo and then start editing them. So that is one way to do it. And I've done that. I've tested that on a few hundred images and then just brought them back into Lightroom and made small tweaks. The other things that make it unique. So let's just go ahead and maximize some of these things too. So let's say strength and color. And you can see when you shoot, if you guys shoot night scenes or blue hour scenes, it's always just like a battle of warm against cool. So this is at the out of camera white balance, and this is it adjusted in Radiant Photo. So it's pulling down the reds here without flooding with blue. It's very quickly changing it. The next thing you'll see here is exposure. And we wanted the exposure to be treated a different way. Rather than just blowing everything out, once Radiant Photo determines your white and black points, it'll go out of its way to preserve them. So if I start to move this up to a ridiculous degree, it's starting to look a little broken, but you can see that it's not blowing out the whites or the blacks. It's allowing me to get in there and just change the exposure independent of the black and the white. So this is really key. Now, from there, it gets a little bit more fun. And, you know, this is where the AI is stacked. So any changes that you make, everything actually updates. It's only caching in previews. So any updates that you make, it's all non-destructive. So as I make changes here, if I make changes with the exposure, we can move on to things like depth. So one of the things that I do in post-processing that I've always done after the balancing of an image, which pretty much this can take the place of, or, you know, an auto button that actually works, that gets you started, is adding selective contrast, right? And then that could be in Lightroom, that could be combinations of masks. The new masking is amazing in Lightroom, by the way. They nailed it. I love it. You can do selectively. You can kind of make the background feel more distant from the foreground or add contrast. So depth kind of goes in there and analyzes that for you. And it does it two different ways. So I'm going to turn everything up kind of a lot just to show this as an example. So without depth and then with depth, when it adds the depth and contrast, it looks into the dynamic range to try to increase it. So if you're familiar with other tools, things are called like micro contrast, pro contrast, selective contrast, all of these things. It's actually going in and finding areas in quarter tones to add contrast to. Definition gives it more definition, and contrast doesn't minimize the definition, but it gives you contrast without excessive detail in the highlights and shadows. So you can see the difference between these. And if you're not sure, you can kind of toggle back and forth and kind of get the feel that you want. Light diffusion is simply put what it says it is. So light diffusion is like an Orton effect without actually messing with your pixels. So it's pretty cool. It's also like a global eraser for things being too harsh. Like anything here, I'm like, well, you know, let's just go ahead and diffuse it a little bit just to soften it out. And you can very quickly get some interesting results. So that's the basic of the tools. Now, all of these can be changed. If you want to reset, you can hit reset, or you can just say detect. So anytime you click detect, it'll come back to its original detection here under night. This is the simple way of working. And again, all of this is based on the analysis of the image. So if it doesn't find what it is, auto radiant is just different settings. So these settings, just in case it says landscape, you could put landscape on a person. It's not going to try to mask a face on your mountain. Nothing like that is going to happen. And what's cool about this is I've been working in this mode called subtle. So it ships with two created. These are two models that we created and we tuned specifically. I've been using the subtle one, which gives a little bit more of a subtle result with less sharpening. The Pro is the one that comes loaded, which is just going to be a little bit more intense. Now, what's neat about this is you can change these models. So if you open up Radiant Photo and you think, hey, that's just a little too intense for me right out of the box, you can change this to subtle. And that's before, if we have time to get into, you can actually train this yourself and get your own settings. So working in Pro or subtle is probably the first choice. that you would make. So you can see it's really quick. On the quick edit, everything's pretty much right there. Into the detailed edit, this is where you start to see everything else that's in those categories. So we saw light diffusion, we saw depth, and now we have a couple other things that are interesting, like the white and the black point. So we could see if there's any clipping here, just in the typical areas here, the stars, obviously, some of the shadows. This is a very, I mean, it's a night exposure at high ISO. This is kind of how things kind of happen. But if you want to adjust those points, you can always roll the white points in and the black points, and it'll kind of pull the histogram in. And again, once you set these points, when you start to adjust the exposure, we can see that it's not going to break those shadows. It's not going to break those highlights. So you very quickly can set the base tone of your image and then refine it a little bit more. Now, there are other tools that I can get into a little bit later, but scrolling down here, we pretty much covered almost everything in tone. If you put face aware on, if there's a face, it'll actually make sure that it's masking around the face and everything looks good. If you turn face aware on with a landscape and nothing happens, that's a good thing, because there's no face. So you should keep that in mind. If you're not sure, you can turn it on. It's AI. It won't actually do anything if it doesn't find it. Color is a pretty interesting idea here. So if I bring in a couple other images, and actually, I'm going to borrow some images. We'll use this one. And I'll borrow one of Albert Dross's photos. When I say borrow, I mean steal. Every time I shoot with him, I just take his memory card and sort of have my way with it. And then I'm like, I can use this, right? He's like, oh, I don't know if you can. Okay, I already used it. So you have to say yes. So this will come up as auto radiant. I can change it to people, and there's going to be a subtle difference. And before and after. So if I just leave this, let's go ahead and zoom in here. By default, it cleans it up pretty well. Everything it's definitely adding the clarity of color and the color separation. But what we don't realize sometimes is as we're starting to move the histogram, and I do underexpose things a lot because there's a lot of detail in the shadows, especially at 16-bit, the color will start to accumulate your edit. So if you're adding highlights, you're adding exposure, you're adding these things, the colors are going to change too. And that's just natural because we're putting more light into it. And you can see now it's going to heat the colors up a little bit. It's going to push it a little bit too far. That's natural. And there are a couple of circumstances where that happens all the time. If you're a landscape photographer, you realize that greens are usually neon green. That's because we've adjusted the brightness of the greens. So it would be great if there was a tool that just addressed that for us and made sure that as we're making corrections, that would all stay the same. So it's a little confusing at first, but we have a tool called Fidelity. And Fidelity has two modes. Standard just means it's going to fix the colors, and it's going to fix the color separation very specifically. Vivid just means it's going to do the same thing and then make it like more contrasting. So if you feel like you need like the same color correction, but intense, that's the difference. So now if I take a look at this, and it's going to be subtle, but you'll see the before, we'll see where this is getting a little bit more neon, and the after with Fidelity. So this comes into play, pretty strongly. And again, I can still make changes here to the color correction if I want to bring some of the warm tones back and different things like that. So without any color correction, without any Fidelity, you can see this came out, very warm for the lighting environment. With the AI color correction, plus the Fidelity and the exposure bump, I can start to really get that to look natural. So it's really working on natural color. And so this is a really nice tool, and it's something that we can use in almost any circumstance. And I think one of my favorite examples, it's not a great photo, but it definitely illustrates the reason that most landscape photographers like me don't really love just green things. Like obviously fall colors and snow and like all these things are great, but when you have something that's underexposed, and I'll leave it in the detailed edit here, like that's already really nice before and after for an underexposed image. It's not the best time of day or season or anything for this, but if I start to change the exposure, and I'll see here, there's my greens. Okay, that's looking okay, but this is now what greens do. every time we adjust them. It doesn't matter if it's Capture One, Lightroom, it's not a color issue, it's a correction issue. It's a luminance issue, it's an exposure issue. So Fidelity will put that back into check and bring it back to a normal tone. And I'll turn it up a little bit more just so we can see. So before and then after, it's going to reach in and mitigate all of those things that are picked up by the color. So it's something that I usually leave turned on in my presets because 9 out of 10 times it's actually it's adjusting it, especially if you leave it at like 30 to 50%. It's very helpful. So these are sort of the I would say the more standout features, obviously sharpening, there are more things in color. We have contrast tools as well. So super contrast, like I said, it's always super contrast, micro contrast. There are only so many, I couldn't think of a better word for super. Although it doesn't, I don't know where you go from super. Like if we had one that controls this one, it's like ultra, ultimate, I don't know. Anyway, so this is something for later. So it actually goes in and adds more of a tonal depth. You can see then just the regular contrast. It's very nice. Now, something that's also really fun, if we take a look at some other photos, and again, this is one of Albert Dross's photos. So this was also testing the Sony RAW files, is why he gave me these. This is straight out of camera, and this is the radiant photo correction. It sucks. It's really bad. Now, here's why. The strength is really good, but the color is stripping all the warmth out of a photo. So there are times when you don't want any of that color correction to happen. And that's why we wanted these things to be separate. Rather than just one power slider, we wanted you to have the ability to say, you know what, I want to optimize the exposure. I want everything to, touch black and white evenly and have everything optimized, but I don't want it to touch the color. And in that case, this image works really well. So in the other examples, we kind of build up to this. As I change the exposure, you can see that it's keeping the detail underneath and it's maintaining that color. So I've gone from here to here while still maintaining this detail, which is pretty incredible. Diffusion, again, gives a little bit softening, and then it's almost done. So these are really quick ways to sort of work with it. And let me see if I just one more image, and then I'll show a little bit of a different workflow with something else that I'm working on. Images that, for example, like a lot of these are pretty, pretty cool because it will go in and correct sort of blue hour shots and we'll do all the color separation that we talked about. But what's also interesting is you can bring photos that are finished in. So what I've been doing is basically challenging myself to say, all right, this was a final photo. This has been out for 10 years. I did everything I thought I could, and then letting Radiant Photo have a go at it. So I'm like, okay, yeah, it's a little bit more even. And I'm like, okay, well, I can use subtle for finishing. And then the results, I can see that, wow, it actually did a really good job. So this is with more finished photos. The AI is smart enough to know that, hey, this is already very close to done. There's not much left to do, so don't mess with it. So that's the nice thing about the adaptive AI. So even here, this is before, it's kind of hard to see, before and after. It's just going in, optimizing it. And most of the optimizing came in the contrast. So it's pretty smart. So smarter than a fifth grader, at least. And it's like only an American reference. It doesn't work anywhere else. Do you remember that show?
I do.
I had to stop watching it because I felt so dumb.
Those are some smart kids, to be very honest.
I know, but I'd always try to watch Jeopardy, and I'd get excited when I get like 2 or 3, the whole show. A fifth grader was just made me sad. It's like, oh, so that school really came in handy. So Radiant Photo, Radiant Photo works as I'm working in standalone mode. It doesn't have a library. It doesn't have, image asset management or anything like that. It's just meant to be a batch or a single image editor. So you can sync settings. It's really easy to do. You can close these, bring other things in, and you can either do a save or a save all. So once you're in Radiant Photo, there's no way to save a session in this format, right? Once you close it, everything, will be gone. You can't just save a Radiant Photo file and have all these images in because it's meant to be a plugin. But when you do click save or save all, there are some really, really good batch tools that you should be familiar with, because they don't mirror, but they simulate what a batch processing workflow should look like. In other words, do we want to create these in the same folder as original? So imagine you send your TIFF files here, your raw files here from Lightroom, and you want them to come back, same folder, and you can say put it in subfolder, or you can say just a custom name. It will never replace unless you tell it to. So that's one thing too. Keep both. Give it an end tag here. So it would be right next to the original one, and then by default, Radiant Photo. And I know you guys are thinking that was like the most clever thing we could have done at the end of a file based on this. And we support JPEG, TIFF, PNG, or the original format. And if it's 16-bit that you send in, it's 16-bit out. So it maintains all of that, doesn't break anything. The same as original is kind of cool if you're working in Adobe RGB and you don't know, but you want to think you're in Pro Photo. It's not going to read. It's just going to do what's there, or if nothing's there, it's going to put something there. So it's very conscious of protecting everything that comes in and then everything that goes out. So it stays the same bit rate as it goes through. Quality of JPEG. This is a new feature that we have. Isn't that cool? Didn't think about it. It turns out that you do want to control that. Reduce size, those things. This is version 1.1 we're at, and we've already kind of come a long way. So little things like that, like these thumbnails, we're still trying to figure out why they do that. This is the fun thing about, the software part of it. I'm coming from a photography background, all the things that I want it to do, and then all the things like creating a website, you're like, why isn't it working? It should work.
Technology is fun or not fun that way.
Right. It has its perks, Later I'll just feed everything into the AI that's going to take over the world, and we'll be good. So because it is a plugin, oh wait, I think this is going to leave get rid of this. Was that leaving a black? Did you guys have a blackout on the screen where these?
No, I see the architecture and the
good.
Beautiful fall colors.
Good. Okay. The tools used to black out some of Lightroom. They must have updated that. Yeah. So this is something I shot a couple weeks ago, and these are just tests. But I was getting towards sort of a final edit, and I was testing some different sort of color corrections. And again, this is a 16-bit file. It's going to take a little bit longer to load, but anything in Lightroom, whether a single photo or a batch, can be sent right to Radiant Photo, just like it could be sent to Photoshop or anything. It'll round trip it back. And we can do that with an edit in Radiant. Let's just say original because it's a 16-bit. And even with a 16-bit file, it will, this is 100 megapixels, 16-bit. So we're really like saying, okay, 5 seconds. That's not too bad for opening and correction. So before and after, not too bad, actually. I think it's pretty close. And that picked landscape night because it was a little bit darker. So we'll go back to the regular landscape. And I will go back to the Pro model because that was my custom presets. And so this before and after. Oh, it's not too bad. It picked, sorry, there we go. Before and after. So very quickly, it already determined sort of that color separation. I'm very careful not to blow anything out here. You can see that we were in production. There's a couple tripods back here, all that kind of stuff. And as many times you say, guys, can you just move a little bit? No, I'm shooting wide. No, wider. Like, get behind the temple. This is a sort of a deep object focus stack. So this is about 8 frames that I'm putting together. It's not perfect. Again, these are just tests. You can actually see through little things. So there are some things to work out here, but what I wanted to be able to assess was the color. So putting all the fall foliage in there and making sure that our greens are represented, all the different tones are represented. And quickly from here, based on what we've done so far, we could easily say, let's notice a little bit of light diffusion, a little bit of contrast depth here, just to bring it a little bit more final. So very quickly, I can send this back to Lightroom and then just do some finishing. On this itself, I need to get rid of this. I need to get rid of the tripods, and there's still some more editing and object removal and fixes of different focal areas and things like that that I have to do. But as a before and after tool, it's pretty close. And that's what's really fun about this. And again, using Pro, I can always go subtle instead if I want to do a little bit of additional editing here. And now it'll be a little bit more subtle. So when I send it back to Lightroom, now I can do a little bit more to it. So it's kind of up to you. But go ahead.
Are you using the full version here? Or are you using the Lightroom plugin specifically? Because we did have a question about
this is
the
Lightroom
difference between the
Classic.
plugin and then the full version in the chat. So I was waiting for a good time to ask about that.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is the same, it's the plugin version, but it runs a separate.
Oh, looks like we lost you, Elia. Is he frozen for everybody? Oh no. All right, he's back. And you're on mute.
Oh, I went away.
There you go.
Okay, so it works as a plugin. You can run it as a plugin and a standalone at the same time. So it's the plugin for Lightroom works because it's, if you say edit in, you'll see Radiant LR. And the only difference between a Radiant LR and the other Radiant is essentially the save. So I can, let me go switch back to this here.
And we're not seeing your screen.
Oh, I know.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. Yeah. So here, if I'm in the quick edit, I can save it out. And the difference is in this case, with the settings that I change, it's going to send it right back to Lightroom. So you can still run the other Radiant photo in the background. I know it's a little confusing, but it frees up the resources and allows us to tune a specific version just for Lightroom to make it faster.
Gotcha.
It also helps with batching because we do some really clever things to make it super, super fast in the background. So this is pretty much the basis of the editing. But if you were familiar with version 1.1 adds a color grading tab. These tools were all there before, but now it's simplified and sort of put it into its own category. So when you select color grading, it's pretty fun. So a lot of these are really cool LUTs that you can apply, but you can apply them in a different way than you're used to. So I'm working on a bunch of Fujifilm LUTs. I don't know if you shoot Fujifilm or Sony or Nikon, Canon, all those color profiles that you can add when you're in Lightroom or when you use the raw file. Imagine if you could just add 10 or 20% of that. That's kind of what I'm working on right now. So I feel like a 25% Velvia mood for this one, or a 25% classic chrome. That's what we're able to do with these. So any of these looks that we have, I'm going to go into some of my favorite ones here. So let's say Street Pack, Street Angel. So this is going to transform the color, and I can go through these live and kind of see what they're going to do. So pretty standard and pretty rough on this because there are a lot of colors here. But what's nice about the color grading is we give the ability to change the strength independent of the saturation and the contrast. So turning this all the way down, I can just add a little bit, just as a little push for the colors to change it. And we can see that before and after. I can also soften contrast and even saturation. And as I start to do this, to sort of modify this look, it's going to remember those settings as I audition through different looks. And if you think about this, it's pretty powerful because now we're giving it a soft style. And this could be everything that is here that's a LUT. You can take your presets in Lightroom, they're just LUTs. So you can actually convert them and we can load them into Lightroom. Into Radiant Photo. We're working on tools to be able to do this because it's the way that the color and light is distributed. And it's kind of a fun way to do different things. And it's a really powerful way because if you think about it, if you have a bulk of images that you want to edit, you can send them all here and unify the editing underneath. Then when you go to color grade, this is where it becomes really key. So let's say that we want something that's fairly washed out, or we want to create like a bleach bypass, which this is not a bleach bypass, but let's pretend it is something close to that. This is what we're going to put on top of all of our images. Well, what's actually happening here is something quite cool. So without the pre-editing, it would look very different. So this is what it looks like with everything. This is what it looks like without the color grading. But if I go here and just take the develop settings down, I can do that a couple different ways. This is what we're used to seeing. So when you apply a preset or a LUT, this is what you'll see. It's just naturally going to apply the colors to whatever it is, no matter what you have to do what's underneath. So in Lightroom, to put this LUT on it, then I'd go shadows, highlights, and I'd have to develop it. But since this allows you to do that first, and it knows the process order, we can bring and build this up before this color grade is applied. So you can very much regulate all of the pixels underneath before you start giving them your style or your preset. And we've even added, this is new too, you can increase or decrease all of your edits in the detailed edit just with this one power slider if you need to bring it up. And once you click save, depending on how large these files are, this one being about as large as I can make a file so far. When you do the 16-bit in Photoshop, then you just save as PS speed. Like, don't even try a PSD. Get more than one layer. It's not even worth it. 2 layers and it's going to make you do it.
So quick question here about the using it with Lightroom, with the Lightroom plugin. Looks like we're looking for some clarification in the chat on non-destructive editing. So is it re-editable if you reopen from Lightroom back into Radiant, or is it are the changes baked into the TIFF or whatever you bring it? You have Lightroom set to bring it back as? Yes,
they're baked in with Lightroom. Yes.
So it's the same process if you're working with Mylio. So if you're opening the image from Mylio Photos directly into Radiant, and that's running the full version, so you don't have to worry about the plugin side of things. When you go ahead and click save, it's going to save back to that original folder. You can even automatically stack it with your original in Mylio Photos, and it's the same process. So you're not losing any information by using Lightroom over Radiant.
No, and there's also something I'm sort of right. See, it's Lightroom now that's sort of chugging along here to bring that 16-bit file back. I mean, I'm not saying anything bad of Lightroom. It's just it's interesting sometimes. Okay, so this is so here's a DNG that I converted. I'm just going to open it. So this is a DNG file that came from DxO. So it took the raw file, converted it, doubled its size because it's just a TIFF in a different file format. There's nothing special about it. We'll go ahead and open it. And if you want a non-destructive workflow, first, and this is something that I have to clarify, if you take your raw file and put it into a 16-bit TIFF, the raw file is no better than a 16-bit TIFF. So once you convert it, as long as you're using an editor that doesn't just artifact the crap out of everything, you can move the color, you can change things. So a raw file is not more powerful than a 16-bit TIFF. It's just depends on how you're converting that raw file, right? Like if you're using, I don't know any bad ones these days, but some are better than others. Some people really like Capture One. So if you're using the Capture One to convert it, what becomes important in your raw file is not non-destructive, because once something's in a larger container, it's the same. You can always move it around. But what the DNG and the raw allow you to do is change the common sliders. That's it, shadows, highlights, midtones, those things. But if you have everything in a different container and you start doing that in Adobe Camera Raw and it's not a raw anymore, it's going to be the same. It's not going to destroy it. So if you want a truly nonlinear workflow with Radiant Photo, you can do it a few different ways, but the easiest way is in Photoshop. So, and that's unilaterally with any file, any format, anything. Once you open up in Photoshop, you can turn something into a smart object. And I just did this with a 16-bit file. So I do have a pretty fast Mac. I'm just letting you guys know. So when you apply any type of filter here, so if I pick Radiant Photo, again, it's going to take a while because this is a huge file. When you turn something into a smart object, it will remember the settings. You can go back and edit them. So then it'll be non-destructive. This works with anything. Now, keep in mind, when you open up a raw file into Photoshop, it has you convert it. And when you do that, you want to select 16-bit TIFF. It's very sneaky about setting the default to 8-bit, and it's 16-bit. Once you do that, you do not lose anything from your raw file. So you're not losing data. You can push the data the same amount. It's all the same. Adobe Camera Raw is exactly the same as Lightroom. It's the same engine. working on the same file, there is nothing larger that we can work with a 16-bit TIFF. You put all of it into this largest container possible, you haven't lost anything. You just have to make sure that anything camera specific, like lens, chromatic aberration, distortion, those kind of things, that's where you kind of want to make sure you identify those before you bring it in, because that's very much baked into that metadata. Other than that, everything else is pretty much the same. So if we just use Radiant Photo at the default settings, and I hit apply, again, you know, I'm doing this with actual files that I'm working on at 16-bit. So it takes a little bit of time, and it takes extra time to write it to a smart object. But once it's a smart object, you can double click on it and go and make any changes that you want. So this is kind of nice if you're unsure. So you could run it through Radiant Photo, then, you know, we can toggle it on and off. We can go back into those settings. And if I click on it, I'll do it. But again, it's 16 bits, so it's going to take a minute. It has to remember everything. It has to open it. It has to, you know, recache in, and then I can make some changes. And if I make some changes, it'll update. And it takes a lot longer. So when you start doing this in Photoshop, obviously it's going to take longer, but it's really powerful. So going back to the editable thing, and this being, you know, it is 16-bit. Most of your cameras are going to be 14, some are 12. Moving 14 into 16, you never want to put it down to 8. It's just move it into 16. If I now do something like camera raw filter, I'll just do something really quick, just as an example. Not to teach you guys how to use some of this if you haven't used it, but it's awesome. So let's just say that we want a color range, and I just want to kind of identify some of the reds here, which is kind of nice. And I'll increase that range. Let's add some, let's take the exposure down on these and shadows up. Let's just do some sort of heavier contrast on them, pulling the blacks down. So this is just really quickly to be able to do a few things here. I'll do the same thing in the greens just to isolate them. Again, if you haven't used these tools, they're really good. I finally feel like they've done it. I mean, maybe not like done it, but this is something that actually makes sense now, which for Adobe is great, because everything's always really powerful, but sometimes it's not exactly intuitive. So we'll go ahead and bring this into work. So here, just a really quick, really quick, and I'll go ahead and apply this. So if you want to simulate the same thing that you're doing in RAW, and you don't want to do that in Lightroom, you can bring it in to Photoshop, make sure you enable 16-bit, and run Adobe Camera Raw as a smart filter. And you're going to get the ability to go back into the same RAW settings that you had before and make changes to it at any point. It's just arguably going to take a little more time, but it's going to free you from a RAF or RAW DNG format, because all of those are just proprietary systems for holding the same amount of information that you're going to put into a TIFF. The case of DxO, I'm using Pure Raw right now to test against Lightroom, sending things. If you haven't used it, it's really clever because it basically tells you how to bypass Lightroom inside of Lightroom. I think this is like the most clever marketing thing ever. It's like, hey, just send it to us and then send it back to Lightroom. We'll make it better and you can stay in Lightroom. It writes a DNG that's twice the size of your original file, because it's essentially attaching a 16-bit TIFF underneath as your object that you're actually editing. So
Interesting.
I'm not trying to dox DxO for that, but it's a misconception that we have because RAW is awesome. But if you remember, previous to RAW, we could shoot JPEG or TIFF.
TIFF, yeah.
Right. RAW is a little bit different because it can contain more metadata. So then we have the lens corrections, all of these other things that it has. In camera proprietary algorithms from the camera to do sharpening, to do all these things, and also make them non-linear, right? Because their camera recipes are all very proprietary. So it is going to maybe eventually open up the camera raw filter or not, but you can start to really, you know, solidify this non-destructive workflow. And you know what? If I don't use, so I have all the things open right now. If we use a more reasonable file, and when I say reasonable, I'll just say not that one. So this is already a TIFF exported from Lightroom. Let's do the same thing. And you can layer these things again. So we'll just do this. This will be much faster now. Like light years faster. There we go. Yeah, note to self, don't do live demos at 16-bit VFX file.
Well, I mean, I think
over.
it's actually a good example to show that bigger files take time, because I think there's a lot of people who get excited. They go out and buy a camera with a higher megapixel count that than they had, and they don't understand why things are running slower. So, you know, it's good to acknowledge that that's just the way things are.
Yeah, and keep in mind that your camera that you have now, even if it's an iPhone, if we look at these images, the 16-bit and the other one next to whatever it is, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. You know, I'm now developing software, and I've been working with Fujifilm for a long time, so it's just kind of a fun thing, but it's not exactly necessary. You know, that I think that's too. We always think like, is this camera a need or is it a want, right? Like, do I need this or do I just want this? And you know, that's kind of where we fall. So here I'm just making some changes, some basic changes here. And if I click OK, now these two things, you can see I can turn the camera raw filter off, and I can turn radiant photo off, and it'll re-render it in the background to where it was before. If you're doing before and afters, sometimes it's easier to just have a you know, a whole layer underneath that is plain. That's not a smart object. But what we've done now is we've done radiant photo as a default. We've done some color correction, selective adjustments, which is something that Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw, or in Photoshop in general, with now the object selection, makes it very easy to do. But we've also made that all nonlinear, as long as you're, you know, maybe the computer doesn't like it. But it still gives us full flexibility for editing. So if I go in here again, start to add some contrast and, you know, give it the flavor that I want. In this case, it'll all kind of be there. Maybe make it a little bit warmer. Actually, that does look horrible if I do that. Don't do that. Look, this is great. Let's say, you know, select sky. Not bad. So we'll just go ahead and make that a little darker here in the shadows, and I'll just make some changes here. So make it a little bit more obnoxiously changed as an example. So I can reapply this, and now I can go back and edit it. So anything else that I add on the stack, so radiant photo, pre-production, camera raw selective, I could do some masking if I want, but I can still put radiant photo on the top again, or another camera raw filter. So now we can treat this as, let's say, a basic, let's go to auto, a basic finishing tool. So we kind of go from what it was, and we say, okay, you know, that was really close, but let's go ahead and optimize it with our exposure. Let's strip some of that color back out that I kind of messed up. And then we can start to sort of let's dial in some more depth here. And I haven't like done this before on this file, so I'm not just kind of, it's not that I'm making things up, I'm just applying the things I think it needs. So base, middle, and finish. So if you think of this as pre-production can be camera raw, and then you get everything balanced, doesn't have to be radiant photo, but you know, kind of like it. Camera raw can be on the bottom, or you can do that in Lightroom, send it to Photoshop. And then the last pass of radiant photo, instead of an adjustment, could maybe be your color grade. So you can put the color grade on top. With sort of bigger portfolio files, usually end up in Photoshop for one reason or another. And it's typically because I need to change something where I need layers, object removal, different things like that. So if you can do everything from Lightroom, that's great. And I encourage you to, I try to as much as possible, but usually things end up in Photoshop. And if it's a big image, it's going in a gallery, I'm really going to be doing a lot of selective stuff. I mean, that's really where this kind of stuff comes in. We want to do something a little bit more golden and give it a style, contrast and saturation down a little bit, and apply that. Now, if I save this, it'll be a little larger than a normal PSD or PSB, but everything's in that one layer. So I can turn all of these off and get back to the original. Cool, right?
Very cool. So Rob has a question in the chat. He's wondering what updates are planned in the near term, for instance, 6 to 12 months. Now, I know you're probably not going to share any like tiny details and exact things. Like we know in the software business, making promises on exactly what's coming is never something we want to do. But is there anything kind of big picture you can share with us?
Yeah, so we are, yeah, what can I share? We're doing, so let's back up a step from 1.0, was August, September-ish.
Mhm.
We actually released it. So this is 1.1, you know, the first sort of major update. 3 months, 4 months, 4 months. So we've only been alive, not alive, but available for like 4 months. So I already did 1.1. We've had a whole series of incremental updates to address things. Doesn't work on this Windows machine. I have a, you know, I'm trying to combine it with Microsoft Paint. Like that one, we had to retire that ticket. But we've been fixing a lot of little things, patching it, making it performance enhancements, and now overhaul to the interface with more enhancements to everything. So you'll see next year, we're going to have built-in raw processing if you want to use raw processing. We're also going to have very expanded options in the actual AI itself. So that's something that I'm particularly excited about. If you imagine right now, we have, oh, thanks Photoshop for letting me know. Okay, so you can imagine we have all of these different things that we can sort of categorize photos as now. Expect that to grow a lot. So there's only a few categories right now, but it covers almost everything. You'll see a lot more custom presets. Like a lot of these are really great. Anything that's orange is built in. So colorful landscapes, this should have already been out, but I haven't finished it. I just have to do before and after. So you'll see colorful landscapes in the store probably like next week. But a lot of these essentials too, like everything here, once we have these baselines, you can actually save everything. So we'll have a lot more options here as far as fully customizing your scene. And then expect this to get refined even more. You know, we have pro and subtle, but you know, let's just say we're going to be doing things that, I mean, maybe other companies aren't crazy enough to do. I mean, I don't think it's really crazy. It's just that we're really a small, agile company, and we can create AI models really quickly because that's what our team does. So it's a good place to be. What we are going to be is also fun to describe, and what we are not planning on being. And what we are not planning in the near future is any kind of masking. There are not going to be any layers. We're not going to have asset management for a while. You can use Mylio for that. There are so many things that do a better job. You'll see things improve, right? Our detail enhancement, and we're already working with some new noise reduction algorithms that are really cool. So that'll all like get better, and it'll get more stable, and it'll kind of be built out, but we're not going to confuse or crowd the interface. So if you need to make selections, use Lightroom or Photoshop, or if on your iPhone, you can just like select something and move it. You know, there are so many other tools that do things. Asset management too. If you're using Lightroom catalogs, I mean, I'm in Lightroom going out of my way to stay in Lightroom while using another product by DxO. I mean, that says something, right? So it's not going to be a Lightroom killer. It's not going to do sky replacement. It's not going to do HDR. It's definitely not going to do focus stacking, because Helicon focus is, I would not use Radiant Photo for it. Do you see? So
Yeah.
we very much have been in the industry for a long time. So it's very important to us to create tools that we will actually use, and we think people will find very useful without just, you know.
There's something to be said for a tool that does particular things very, very well, as opposed to a tool that does all the things moderately well. You know, sometimes you need those tools like Helicon for focus stacking that just does an incredible job at that one thing.
That's exactly right. And if you have a really noisy photo, Topaz is great, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
if you really need to remove that much noise in Radiant Photo, I mean, it'll do okay. It's not, I mean, that tool is amazing for that one thing, and a couple other things.
Absolutely.
And
now, a couple of questions that I have.
Yeah, sure.
When is a rotate tool coming?
Yeah, so soon, like that was slated for this update, but it takes longer. Okay, so here's a fun fact, and it's a word that I had to learn in engineering, concatenating.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've
okay.
heard that word.
Right. So in a lot of software, when you do something, it kind of like renders it down, right? It's
Okay.
now rasterized it. So everything that you do here concatenates. So everything is dependent on something else. It does not destroy any of this history here. So the AI happens, these happen, then the color grading happens on top of that in a
Okay.
nonlinear format. So at any point during the production, everything that you change will then reapply and remix these effects accordingly. It won't just bake them in and change it again and again and again and again. And some software, every time you make a change and you move on, it's writing that file, rasterizing it, and then changing it again. So if you have 6 contrasts, it's like saving, doing a contrast, saving, doing a contrast, saving. It's not updating. This does that. So that's sort of the fundamental. I lost, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
It was about rotate.
Rotate. Okay. So because of this thing, right, and this AI, the image has to be set before the AI can do its thing, because it's pixel by pixel and it updates pixel by pixel. I thought that rotation was going to be the easiest thing to do, but it's actually really tough, because in order to do that, once you rotate, it throws all of those calculations off, because it was based on the per pixel mapping of the original image. Do you see? So
That's
it wasn't like,
fascinating.
hey, let's do rotation. It was like, no, that's really hard. I'm like, oh, okay. So there's, yeah, weird, right? You learn those
That
things
is.
when you engineering. You say like all this stuff, oh, could we do this? Oh yeah, that's easier. Like, really? But rotate? Okay. It's coming.
Very cool. That is one of those little things that I just wish I could sometimes go in there and just tweak something a little bit. And it's like, I've got to go do it somewhere else.
I know, especially like small things like distortion.
Yeah,
But if you use smart objects, you can go back and do it just in case you forget.
absolutely. Let's see here. Mark asks, if you open a raw file in Radiant and then it's saved out as a TIFF, returning to Lightroom, Lightroom, Photoshop, or Mylio, is the non-destructive raw saved anywhere within Radiant? So Radiant doesn't save your files anywhere. Your raw is protected. Radiant will read the raw, it'll create the TIFF, but your raw is still preserved.
Yeah, that's right. So any of these files, if I send any of these to Radiant Photo, like this one as well, we do an edit in. Once I save it, it'll come back. So edit a copy with Lightroom adjustments. You can't send these files to anything else and have the editing. And remember, it's just this that you're trying to preserve. So once it goes out, it'll adhere to the settings that you want, and it'll bring it in as a 16-bit TIFF on top, and it'll stack it with it. So it doesn't get rid of the raw file, it just stacks it on top as a TIFF. But remember, when you do that, you're not losing any information from it. Just make sure, if you're trying to, sometimes when you're trying to do things, for example, put like a Fujifilm color simulation in Lightroom, once you bring a TIFF in, it locks you out of that, because they don't want you to be able to do with Sony files and things like that. So just bear in mind that it's not like you're losing information. Sometimes you're losing access to things that are raw locked. So that is something to keep in mind. But at this simple piece here, it'll take a while to, again, it's 16-bit. It'll bring it in, stack it, and then you can always go back to the original.
Awesome. And then Rob wants to know, how many machines can he use it on? So if somebody buys a license for Radiant, how many machines can they install it on and use it?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So marketing would want me to tell you 2, right? But we changed, you can actually do 3. Just don't tell them I told you, because it prevents. Yeah. So we do track the systems, right? It's like an Audible account. My brother was listening to it. They're like, too many devices. I'm like, what did you do? And then you have to go and zap out. So we do see that, but there's a little bit of buffer. So if you want to put it on 3, it won't raise any red flags. But if you do run into, like, you try to put it on 16 machines, like, it will say,
no.
Wait a minute. Yeah. Exactly. So very reasonable.
And let's see, there was another question here about, is there an iPad version planned?
Well, I mean, if I just like shrug, does that answer the question? Because I can't say too much. Yes. So we will be developing more, not only tools, but more ways to seamlessly integrate 16-bit workflows. And with the iPad Pro sort of comes this unique ability to be able to seamlessly work on images like this and have this really perfect pipeline of, just taking or putting the laptop down and leaving with the iPad, plugging another hard drive into it, and having the ability to continue to work. So yeah, these things are all on discussion right now. And we can't talk, we don't want to overpromise, right? Like, cause sometimes like the rotate tool, I would have just said, yeah, we'll add that next week, no problem. And then it's months later. It's more that we just want to be sure. But once we do kind of firm up on things, like even this 1.1 update, if you were in the community, you saw that for a few weeks, we were talking about everything. Like everybody knew what was coming, and we sort of update everybody on the status. And then, so we're not shy about sharing as we're sort of developing it and estimating the timing. And if we give a firm date, like we're really good at that means we're very confident. I've never liked the whole, hey, we're going to release this next week. And then it's like, oh, well, now it's going to come in February.
I know that's never fun. Occasionally that happens in the software world, like unexpected things happen, but yeah, we try not to overpromise and underdeliver. That's not something we want to do.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So here you see it came in. So there's the original RAF, and here's the process stack. So it's very sort of intuitive here. And this is not updating. It's not. I'm not saying Lightroom. It's just it has to like hand the file off and then bring it back. And so sometimes it takes Lightroom a while because that's I have full res previews, which I don't recommend. Although I'm trying to like test everything, but then you can see that we have this, very easily stacked on top. And last thing too, if you want to batch, you can do that with the very easily do that in export. And there's some presets that you'll see right here. So you can say hide the Radiant Photo window, which means that it'll just process in the background. It won't actually show you the visual interface. And then you can say add to this catalog. We want to same as original, put in a subfolder, add to stack below or above original, and I'll send everything out, put it in the same folder, rename it however you want it renamed, and pair it all with everything that's in your catalog. And there's no limit to that. It's limited based on your computer, right? Like how many things you can layer and batch process. So I think, I confidently will do a few hundred at a time and then walk away for a little while, but I haven't done more than like 300 as a test, 400 maybe. But you're more than welcome to push it as far as you want. I just know that it's like, at that point, anything that I use, like Photoshop will crash, Lightroom will crash, everything will crash. Like, so I'm not expecting Radiant Photo to suddenly be the one thing that doesn't crash from me overdoing it.
That's what we're supposed to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I did put a link in the chat for anybody who doesn't have Radiant yet to get the discount, the Mylio discount for that. If you're new to Mylio Photos as well, there is a bundle that's available that gets you both Radiant and Mylio Photos, but the link that I put there is just for Mylio users who already have Mylio and want to get Radiant. I believe the regular price is $159, correct? So not discounted, it was $159 for Radiant?
Sounds about right. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm really good at my own company. Yeah. And remember, like we do, there's a great bundle, and obviously we've had like Black Friday and there's like all the Christmas stuff. So you guys know I'm not on all the things that I want. But we also have the trial too. So you can try it. There's also something pretty cool that's worth noting. If we go to, let me see if I can actually find it. Yeah, if you go to, this is our community, you can join our community, but if you go to Radiant Imaging Labs, you don't even need to download Radiant Photo itself. You can actually see your photos. So if you load this little web tool that we have, you can upload your own images and see exactly what it's going to do. You can't make any changes, right? But this says AI scene, it detected people, and you can see what the default is going to look like. and you can load your own images into that.
That's really neat.
Yes, I don't know, what is this? Adobe Stock. I don't know, like I don't know where, I have so many, I search for things on my computer. That's my file sorting. So you can see there, and you can start to change the different types of scene detection and kind of figure out like how it's going to look on your images, how it's going to look like on other images, and how it's going to detect. So it's, yeah, it's not perfect. It's weird. We're going to turn everything into a person, guys. Everything's going to turn into a person. So this gives you, if you want to upload some stuff and just do some quick tests and see if it's something that you like, it's like being at the eye doctor, better or worse, better or worse. If you find yourself that is better, then you can download the trial and go from there.
Awesome. Well, are there any other questions for Elia before we sign off for today? I know there's been a few in the chat. I hope I got everything. If I missed anything, please feel free to unmute and ask. This is a great time to do that.
Yeah, please. And community.radiantimaginglabs.com. We have a really cool group set up here, and with a lot of content, and we're kind of building our technical community in here, and just sharing a bunch of stuff. So if you want to kind of see what it's like to just be part of the community, you can kind of come in and check out some of the stuff that we do. We're expanding it too. We have a toolkit program that gives you access to a certain amount of tools every month, which presets, LUTs, different things like that. So we're expanding that so that people can start to share custom things. And it's growing really nicely for only being in existence for 4 months. I always have to remind myself of that.
It's pretty
what
amazing.
Kind of training do you, what kind of training do you have? I noticed with the bundle, you give a video course. Do you get that? Would everyone get that?
Yeah, so yeah, we have everything sort of comes into this with the bundle. There may be some things that you're getting sort of off the top, but if you're looking for the basic introductions, then it's all going to be sort of linked to the community. Later, we're going to provide a lot more content, but the short and middle term plan is to make it all free. So I'm working on photographing the world right now with all of these images from fall, but I'm also building tutorials for the website and also for the community that show a lot of what I showed today, but then little ways that it can fit into the most, I wouldn't say standard workflows, but common workflows, Lightroom to Photoshop, Lightroom to something else, Capture One to the, you know, all of the ways that we tend to work. I'm kind of figuring out the easiest ways to work with Radiant Photo, or the most logical ways to get started with it, or even decide if it fits into your workflow. You know, that kind of starts to look like this. Have fun? Yeah.
Good stuff.
Yeah. This is like the artistic side, and then this is the technical side, which is like both of them. I like flowcharts and stuff, which is really weird. I just learned that like 2 years ago, so it's working out pretty well.
Very cool. Well, if you guys join the Radiant community, it will look a lot like the Mylio Photos community. We use the same background hosting component for that, so navigating that should be pretty familiar. Just some different content and ways to use the Radiant Photo software. I'm a member over there. I haven't been very active. I'll have to go check it out a little bit more often. I have been really enjoying using Radiant though, just to give that final touch to a lot of my images. I'll get things to where I'm like, this looks pretty good, whether I'm, you know, editing in Camera Raw, or I've run it through maybe Luminar Neo or something else. And then I'll pop it into Radiant. It just gives it that little extra punch. And I was like, and there it is. So yeah, I've been very happy with it.
That's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that. Yeah, we don't want to over process things, right? But we want to bring them to a balance, and that balance is different for everybody. But I always think of it as like optimization, whether it's pre or final, like that last final touch. I'll be like, well, I thought I had everything edge to edge, but it just kind of expands it a little bit for me and make sure it's not broken. Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Elia. I really appreciate your time and going over the software with us. I know I learned a lot. There's more there than you think. It works so well, and it's quite simple to use, but there's a lot of depth that you can get into. So I appreciate you showing us some of those ins and outs. It's been a lot of fun, and I hope you'll join us again sometime.
Yeah, happy holidays, everybody. Enjoy
happy holidays.
Downtime if you got it.
All right, Mark, did you have a question? Before we sign off?
One thing I wanted to bring up.
Hmm.
I bought Radiant kind of late compared to a few of the people here. And my original plan for it was to use as a preprocessor. Go in and let it do its smarts on it, pretty much in automatic mode. And then I was going to take it on further in Luminar. I have been trying to shake Adobe for ages. And it's not that I'm anti-subscription. I'm just anti-Adobe in general. The
I
stuff
can see that.
it's large, it's cumbersome, it's slow, and it's not that I don't know how to use it. I've been in the Adobe Photo Suite now for probably 12 or 13 years. I did finally dump it about a month and a half ago. And then a guy named Mark Pollitt came along with a Photoshop script that I had to have, and I had to sign up again. But I've got a minimum program now because I don't use I'm not using their DAM anymore. I'm using Mylio. And
Yeah.
this is my second point. I'm the one that asked all the non-destructive editing questions. I've been in photography since my late teens and early 20s in college. I'm currently 68, getting ready to turn 69. I've been in photography a long time. And when you go back and look at a photo that's 5 years old, you say, man, I'd really like to re-edit that. That doesn't mean I want to go back to the original RAW and start over again. That's not what that means. Being able to save into a TIFF, I understand you don't lose anything. In fact, you gain some things, but you don't maintain non-destructive editing. Now, I've been using Luminar to kind of get around this because Luminar does save the original RAW I sent it with the edits in its own catalog, which I'm not sure is an ideal situation. Now I've got two separate places to back things up, but I do still have non-destructive edits. Why is it that Adobe's Photoshop with smart objects is the only living thing of its type in the industry? I mean, like with you guys and Mylio are obviously, if not working together, which I suspect given some of your technical management, but even more so from a marketing standpoint. Why is it somebody else hasn't done this? It is not hard. I've been a programmer for 45 years. I know this is not difficult to do.
It is, but you also have to understand destructive versus non-destructive adjustments. So where in Lightroom, the reason it's non-destructive is because we can disable it. If you start using the clarity slider, it's super destructive, but you can turn it off, right? The second you save out, you're saving it with Lightroom adjustments. Save it without them. And then you can move everything around. So saying something's non-destructive just means that we have to address what is. So when I finish a file, it goes out to 16-bit TIFF. My starter file goes out to 16-bit TIFF, but that's in the hopes that I can edit it later. Like you said, I don't want to go back to the original. I just want to make tweaks. What I actually do is I remove all the sharpening from Lightroom if I'm using Lightroom, all the pre-sharpening from any other application, and then I save a sharpened version and an unsharpened version. Sharpened version goes to print, sharpened version goes out. And then I have the one underneath that I haven't done anything destructive. Not to say that I couldn't open up the PSD and turn the layer off. To be 100% transparent, I just started using smart objects. I've used Photoshop since 1999. I do use them when I need to. I just started using them 2 weeks ago, so I can teach it. I don't use them. I just commit to it. You know, it's a lot of waste. The idea of a seamless RAW format is cool. It's a DNG, but like I said, it's just a 16-bit TIFF baked into a DNG format. DNG is universal in that it is readable, but remember, they're not all the same. So if you do like an HDR Pano DNG from Lightroom, that has a lot more information than most things can read, right? Like I don't think Radiant Photo can read that, but it unifies certain things, doesn't make them non-destructive. It just gives you the ability to undo them. That's different than non-destructive.
Yeah,
every adjustment you make to something is destructive in some way. Do you see? But it's the ability to undo.
So you actually do keep everything in, once you've done your edits, you keep everything in TIFF then?
Yeah, so it's weird, right? Because if I open up, let's say I just don't do anything in Lightroom. I could do distortion correction, whatever. I bring it into Photoshop. I use Adobe Camera Raw, I adjust it. And then I'm like, oh, I want to go back to the original, and I readjust it to look like the original. I didn't really lose anything because I'm moving everything around in 16-bit space.
Yeah.
If I cranked it so far to the right that I broke it and the noise, kind of comes out, we're really stress testing the limit of the data itself, not the file structure, because once it's in 16-bit, it shouldn't be doing that. But as you start to move what used to be called recovery type sliders or smart contrast or AI sliders, you will see things start to break. And that's what you start to see, like, okay, Canon has more noise and this and that. These are so, minuscule and technical that most people wouldn't be looking at it. But I think that what most people want is to know that they're not destroying anything along the way. That's different than being able to undo every single step you've done from the beginning. That is not as necessary. And I think that
I agree.
You've been in this for a long time. I started Photoshop just when version 5 came out, like getting to undo was like this amazing thing. We're like, wow, we can undo. So this idea of never committing to anything is manufactured by Adobe, by the camera companies, where it's like you have to shoot raw, and then once you do TIFF, you can't do anything. It's sorry guys, bullshit. You can take the same information. There's nothing bigger. Well, there are bigger files. If you watch Avatar, if you can actually get through it, it is bigger than a 16-bit TIFF. But we're working in a 16-bit TIFF. Our cameras are usually 14. You'd be surprised what you can get away with.
Yeah, I don't honestly know what my camera is. I know it's huge, but I don't know if it's 14 or 16-bit. I don't honestly
14.
know. 14. Probably 14. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anything. Maybe Sony's doing 16, but again, you won't notice this until you push things farther than you should be pushing them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I think I'm sort of in that business. I bought a 60 megabit pixel camera so I could do wall murals, and I'm producing them up to 6 foot now.
Yeah.
So I am pushing the limits of my talent and my equipment.
Yeah, and my feeling is I think iPhone, the HEIF or HEF, which is the HEIC, that new format that contains the LiDAR and everything, that's 10-bit.
Yeah.
So what we're shooting on the iPhone now is 10-bit, which is a lot of information, but it's its own container system that they're creating, which was pretty cool. But my feeling with Radiant Photo was if somebody has an 8-bit file, a 16-bit file, whatever it is, when it passes through Radiant Photo, even if they don't know what it is, it's going to make sure that it doesn't destroy anything, right? If somebody wants to bring a DNG in and they want to send it back, we're working on DNG so that people can send it back and still have the edits on it. We're not destroying any information. We're just making it editable. When you send something to DxO and it makes it twice the size, you're like, oh, it added information. No, it just put a 16-bit TIFF on there. So we have this capacity to think that things are better when it's, or it has to be good because, or, but when you're just moving information around, you're really not hurting that much. And then it's very subtle if you want to push things like 19 stops, but then you're using blending or dynamic, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. Well, it's a good question though.
You're about the 5th person in less than a month, and 2 of them are from the Mylio side, told me to get off this non-destructive thing. I think I better drop it. It's getting old.
Well, yeah, I know we're running long too, but it's funny because non-destructive is different than being able to undo, to not commit, right? Like you have to understand that most of these things that you're doing are non-destructive. You can change them back. You're moving this stuff around. It's just that you can't undo it. You can change it again.
You're the first one that's kind of spelled it out clear enough that it kind of makes sense. Just keep the TIFF and don't worry, push it to 16-bit, put your changes into it and save it. And
yeah.
And it makes sense now.
You know that you can download the Adobe DNG converter for free.
I've heard that, but I don't so honestly know what I don't know what that I'm just saying, I don't know what their DNG converter actually does. I've never
basically
downloaded
just takes all the RAWs that you have and puts them into DNG container. So it's more of a universal read. So then if you open them in anything, it should pass most of that information, the basic edits back and forth. So you don't need to have Adobe to use DNG converter. So there are ways to not use Adobe, but still use Camera Raw. And keep in mind that the operating system is actually utilizing some of that information on Mac too. So your operating system has a pretty good algorithm for it. If you just open it in Photos, it does a really good job. So
are you proposing to convert the original Camera Raws into DNGs?
I just send them to TIFFs and I'm happy. What I'm saying is where you want to think about it is not necessarily the edits that are being made on top in the raw software. It's what you're doing to it that needs to be done, right? Can you move lens distortion later? Sure, it's written in there. But when you bring the raw file in, that's where they're not all created equal, right? DxO optics is pretty good. You have the keystoning options, all these things that you want to do that you're just going to have to do later. I usually will do, and then send the TIFF out. Lens, chromatic aberration, rotation, distortion, things like that. And then, it's moving the pixel. I could do it in a TIFF as well, but I just feel like if I'm using DxO or Lightroom, it's so fast to do it.
Because when I converted off of Lightroom, I didn't download that tool, but when I converted off to Lightroom and onto Mylio, I did do the conversion on all the non-standard formats I had. And I did that. I exported those separately and then brought them in separately to Mylio. So when I dumped 100,000 photos, now I had 105,000 photos.
That's it?
Yeah. I didn't have that many non-standard because like my Sony shoots ARWs and that wasn't a problem. So, but yeah, it wasn't that bad. Interesting. Well, thanks for the info on that. I know it's a little outside the realm of what we did here, but
it's something that I want people to understand. They don't have to work in 16-bit, but how to actually achieve a non-destructive workflow. That's something that I hope the next tutorial series is out in February, because we're leading with some of that. And it's not to say you don't need this or you don't need to use RAW or all of these things. It's just to sort of liberate you from the idea of non-linear being no decision, right? Because that's really what we're hesitating too much, thinking that we need to go back. So it's like it was a good problem to have, became sort of a bad problem, because now we're looking to all these complex solutions to do something that originally we were able to do 20 years ago.
Well, you brought up a good point earlier. Those of us that have been in the Adobe cave for a long time, we're programmed to believe we have to maintain a non-destructive workflow always. Well, of course, they're going to promote that because they have it.
What does that mean? Yeah, I mean, we'll have to, and it's just running late, but Canon was always like, life is better in full frame. Remember that? And then Fujifilm's like, we're going to do APS-C. They're like, that's not professional. Like, what do you mean that's not professional? Well, Canon said that professional cameras have to be full frame and APS-C is for amateurs. Yeah, we've come a long way. So we have to, and it's not our fault. Yeah, 15 years of shadows, highlights, whites, blacks. I mean, that was a good run, right?
Yeah. Now it's gone the distance. Well, sorry to push this so long, but I'm really glad you clarified that for me. Rich had his chance at clarifying it for me, and he confused me further. So
it's why we make such a great team. We attack it from two different sides.
Well, you really did explain it, and in retrospect, now after listening to you, what he told me makes more sense. But at the time, it's like, I think I better agree. There's a whole bunch of people on here glaring at me.
No, I think it's important to clarify and simplify. Again, once you understand it, you feel it's really just about having the confidence to do what you're doing and not question it, right? Because, thinking that you have to keep a file this way and then being afraid that you're doing this or not sure. If we can just alleviate that and then make people feel better about whatever workflow they're using, just to kind of understand it, even not at a deep conversation level, but just feeling good about it. Like, oh yeah, I'm not destroying this, and then I'll just send it to JPEG or all these things. That's what I hope to accomplish. Just take the stress out of it.
So with my initial run with Radiant, like I said, I used it to do initial auto settings, and it took care of 90% of my issues. Then I just went in and finished up where I needed to, like if I needed masking or a layer or something. I've kind of changed my philosophy now that I've been on it longer. I'm doing more and more in it and less everywhere else. And if I do know I'm going to need layers or masking, particularly finite masking, I'll do it first before I ever send it to Radiant. I just get it over with and send it in. So I've actually gone from starting there to ending there, but there's very little start anywhere else. So it's worked out really well. I'm really happy with the solution.
Yeah, we're very fortunate just in the last couple of years with some of the auto masking tools, and
Yeah,
whether you use it or not, I mean, it's extraordinary.
They really are.
We have a lot of really powerful tools to simplify things. It doesn't take.
AI has come a long way quickly.
It has, and no, it was good. It was fun, and then speaking of AI and those things, yeah, we'll have a lot of updates, and we promise we won't sell the company to Elon Musk.
And stick it on his new iPhone.
All right.
Thanks a lot. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. It was fun.
Thank you so much, Elia, and you're welcome back anytime. Really appreciate you being here today.